Welcome to Powerbuilding, Fund the Future. Brought to you by New Media Ventures, this show dives deep into the transformative work of our founders, partners, and fellow ecosystem leaders who are actively dismantling systemic inequities and building pathways to collective liberation. I'm your host, Abigail Leung, Investment Associate at New Media Ventures. For this season, I'm joined by my co-host, Callie Chamberlain, our 2024 Entrepreneur in Residence. For today's episode, we're excited to be exploring the role of content creators in democracy work. Joining us, we have Elise Joshi. I'd like to note here that because this was recorded in December 2024, Elise will be introducing herself as the Executive Director of Gen Z for Change. And although she has since left that role, she continues her impressive activism work on many social media platforms.
Hi, I'm Elise. I'm 22 years old, based in the Bay Area, born and raised, and I'm executive director of Gen Z for Change, which is a coalition of Gen Z organizers that are leveraging the power of social media, code, content to make a tangible difference on the ground.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit about Gen Z for Change and how you ended up in your current role at the organization?
Yeah, for me, my reason for being in Gen Z for Change is the same reason Gen Z for Change exists in the first place. Is like I wanted to be involved in impact at a time where it wasn't really possible to do on the ground impact safely. This is 2020. I did not get my high school graduation. My first semester of college was just still in my childhood bedroom. And it was happening at the same time as record breaking wildfires in my home state. And the president of the United States was denying the reality of both crises. And I just felt so dystopian because it was. And so I noticed that there was just this gap on social media that I wanted to help meet, which is communicating climate science and climate policy to young people. And I, don't know why I had the audacity to think I was gonna, disseminate that information. But I started trying, and there was a lot of demand for creators when everyone was flooding onto the platform with nothing else to do. And I met the most amazing group of creators that had the same idea in 2020 and formed a coalition. Aiden Cohn Murphy founded it, not me, as a way to meet the moment of, there is a gap in our organizing ecosystem of not using social media to its fullest extent. The Biden campaign wasn't touching TikTok during the 2020 campaign. And this was just a hole in meeting young people and talking to them. And so TikTok for Biden, the coalition that formed and eventually became Gen Z for Change, was an effort to meet that moment and talk to young people and drive them to the polls during such a necessary election, be a part of. And so, yeah, that's the origin of the org and the origin of my involvement in it. I was in the coalition from the beginning and had a bit of a break just for my first semester in person in college and joined the leadership team in the middle of 2021 when there was no funding, no titles or departments or anything. Still the newbie phase.
Amazing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm curious. I'd love to get into the emerging media infrastructure and ecosystem a little bit because you've worked so much in that. There's so many things I want to talk about. I guess first we can start off with the high points and what are you excited about looking at the ecosystem right now?
Yeah, for me, I would say that the election, if there is any opportunity, it's that it was a reflection of where people are at that I think the Democratic Party has been ignoring for years. There's no revelatory information. In my opinion, this was entirely predictable, but we knew that media was important. We knew that we weren't messaging well for the working class. We've been telling funders, the Democratic Party, press this for ages, but this is the most obvious form of something needs to change. And it's reflected in the votes. And when you lose an election, clearly something is going wrong. And that moment of reflection is something I hope that we take really seriously as a movement. And what I personally see the opportunity of is a large shift in what we prioritize and who our coalition is, and that you can't be two things at once. if we have to pick a side, and that side should be the working class. And media must prioritize building a multiracial working class that uplifts everyone and counter Trump's messaging, which is one of, I'll shake things up. You don't like the status quo? I'll shake things up. And we're going to do it by scapegoating immigrants, the trans community, you name it. And we can build a viable alternative to that, because that is his ideas are stupid, but he is offering change. What we can offer and message towards is transformative change that will actually help people in the long term and build community. And I've been wanting to do that. We've been doing that at Gen Z for Change, but I'm excited to just be on the offense on messaging for working people, and yeah, build a powerful left that can actually take on the rising fascism in this country. And so it's an opportunity in crisis. I'm trying to see a silver lining.
Yeah. I think what's really interesting is, Elise, you're kind of describing the beginning of Gen Z for Change, which was set in what, 2016? Yeah,
2020.
2020. Which, I mean, that was just a couple years ago. And then to think about Kamala's last campaign where she had so much emphasis on creators, and then where does that sort of leave us? Because it does feel like it's this emerging space. We've got all of these new voices. So how do we move closer to, at least what you're articulating as the Democratic Party maybe needing to kind of choose sides, and then to do it in a way where it is trust based?
I believe that the content strategy from the Kamala Harris campaign was high engagement through like meme
Mm.
culture and tapping into pop culture, and getting the side of Gen Z that will entertain them without recognizing that you can only put so much lipstick on a pig. Like, if you aren't a candidate of substance and a party of substance, you're not going to excite Gen Z. I'm not sure that the campaign really embraced creators, because
Mm.
creators to the full, like, creators are pro-Palestine. Creators have been talking about the need for a ceasefire for over a year now, and creators have been involved in fossil fuel phase out campaigns that were insanely viral on TikTok, like Stop Willow. And not to mention, Gen Z is facing an economic crisis just like every other generation. If food prices are up a third since 2020, if child poverty is up a third, or is like has tripled since 2021. This is a real issue for our generation, who has student loans, where the healthcare industry is preying on us too. And the solutions offered to us weren't really showcased on TikTok. And so again, like, we as Gen Z for Change could only do so much as well. We're talking about the threats of the Trump presidency that are so real, and I hate that we're in this situation right now. But we had little to work with in offering, an alternative. And, rent caps weren't discussed. Gen Z is more likely to stay at home. We're like facing skyrocketing rent prices. Why was that not discussed? And I could just keep going on and on. And we're here talking about storytelling, media, digital strategy, and I'm talking about policy. They are very much related, because you just can't. You have to build trust with your audience that you're actually with them, and you can't be with them without showing them what your plans are. And so, yeah, it made it hard as an organization to, try and avoid a Trump presidency again.
I'm curious off of that kind of, Elise, maybe the kind of content, because I've seen such a diversity of content from Gen Z for Change. What's some of the content that kind of has worked well, and what are you excited about creating, I guess, or seen created?
Yeah, for Gen Z for Change, when we talk about issues in a populist way, it resonates with people. And people first, community building, populist content. And it when it was really difficult when talking about the IRA. At the end of the day, the IRA was giving tax credits to homeowners. We promise in a few years, this is going to create so many jobs and is going to, reduce emissions, and but it was just this very intangible, not centered on the working class piece of legislation that got really watered down from Build Back Better. It used to have universal childcare in there that would have worked far better on TikTok than some of the provisions that stayed in. No thanks to Joe Manchin. And yeah, when we make content about workers on strike and how they're winning contracts that increase their wages, increase the safety in their workplace, like be bystanding with their fellow workers, like that, it instills hope in people, and it showcases that the dread that you feel in this moment, it can be relieved through, work through unions, through working with your colleagues. And yeah, people are looking for hope. People are looking for not wonky technical policy change, but just genuinely like the simple kitchen table issues, like how are you going to help me? How are unions helping workers? Like that stuff really resonates with people. In parallel, the content that we do on like building people first communities in supporting tenants who are on strike in Kansas City, or supporting transit groups in the Bay Area who are advocating for downtowns to arrive at instead of drive through. It's that type of rebuilding our communities for us that works really well. And yeah, I mean, and not to mention in terms of the style of content too, the more digestible the better. For our election content, it was the humor skit stuff that worked the best. We had like a MAGA Mike series where is this hilarious content creator that makes content typically for young men, making fun of the fact that JD Vance can't really talk to workers, and like he's reenacting JD Vance communicating to a waitress, and that gets millions of views. So the type of content we try to diversify to increase engagement and keep people on a video, but it's also the type of content too, of like making sure the way you're communicating something is like, I see how this could actually help me.
I think this is super insightful. I just want to step back for a second. When we're talking about creators, I'd love to just ask for clarity on what does that mean to you? And when we use that word, who are we talking about?
Yeah, I guess super simply, it's somebody with a sizable platform that's trying to use content as a way to reach a bigger audience. They range in issue area. You can be a creator that's explicitly political and making political content, but you can also be a lifestyle creator, cooking, fashion, you name it.
Those are really helpful, like definitions and clarifications. I'd love to hear, kind of related to that, we're in an interesting place as the creator economy just continues to go, right? And this was the first DNC where there were creators invited. And I'm curious, what do you kind of see? What's your ideal, what's the ideal world in which like creators like interact with an election cycle and influence an election cycle?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm trying to think about an answer on the spot. I haven't really thought about that too much. I think that in an ideal world, there is a candidate that excites so many people that you don't even need to pay them, because it's not you just, if Bernie was the candidate in 2020, I just guarantee you there would be like creators on TikTok talking about any of the specific policies that he's detailed explicitly how he's going to pay for, what he's going to do, showing how they're knocking on doors for them, showing how they're, recruiting more people in their local area to vote, like showing how they what policies excite them the most. Like, and of course, I mean, you'd have like a comms team that has an intentional creator strategy, but my point being is that it's so organic and so resonating with people that the creator economy is already in support of you. And that's not something that, yeah, that's policy first, politician first strategy. Like, I think that comes, the creators do resemble what what the people want in a lot of ways. Like, they have trust with their audience. They are people too. A lot of them, create on the side, and they actually have jobs that are outside of making content. And yeah, if you have a populist candidate that is actually championing issues of the working class, you're going to get a lot of working class creators just organizing as much as they can online. And that's the ideal world for me. I think it honestly comes with a good candidate to have massive social media support. I mean, you did see that to a certain extent in 2020 during the primaries, but a lot of the TikTok for Biden content that was our origin was anti-Trump. narrative, and I think young people are looking to fight for something too right
Mm.
now. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just thinking too as you're speaking, like when people make decisions, right? I was just talking to a friend who was door knocking and he was like, there are some people that I spoke to in Pennsylvania that didn't feel strongly either way. It really just kind of came down to what they heard that day or how they felt that day, or maybe the conversations they were having on their way to vote. And so, I was reflecting on another interview I had heard from someone saying, like, voting is actually very emotional and completely illogical in a lot of ways for some people. And so, I guess when we think about people making decisions and we think about the influence of creators, what is that slice of the pie? Like, how does that play out against the other influences, the other media? Like, how do you think about your creator work in the greater landscape of how people make these decisions?
I mean, in the media ecosystem alone, we're in an uphill battle. Turning Point USA, PragerU are spending tens of millions of dollars on disinformation about why your grocery costs are going up. And the right is on just social media, like taking away all other factors that you're discussing in your question, media alone is preying on justified economic fears and concerns. And so when I'm thinking about our role at Gen Z for Change, I'm just aware that there's the fighting of disinformation and you're fighting against some preconceived notion that they might already have. You're not working on someone in a blank slate of like forming their opinion off of nothing. Like
Mm.
they might already have this idea that the reason why their rent is high is because of an immigrant, somehow. And so you have to like think through that when you're making content too. But yeah, in how to combat that, it really, I mean, we'll say like I think funding is a big piece of it. Like the Democratic Party, the left as a whole beyond the party has to be intentional of like you got to fund people with a pulse on their audience. You have to have trust and you can't just give them a brief that tells them exactly what to say and then just, they're creating inauthentic content for their audience. And yeah, the left is just not funding media in the way that the right is. And
Mm.
that's why the top Twitch streamers are right wing,
Yeah.
with the exception of Hassan Piker. That's why, YouTube. Elon has complete control over Twitter now. And there's an entire platform that we've lost over to the right wing. And so, yeah, I don't have too many solutions for you. It's just something that we continue to consider
Yeah,
as
of
we make
course.
content and how to approach people. And we have young male creators in our audience and the way that we're trying to activate them even more now, knowing the way that young men are voting. We have a Latino wing, Gen Z Pro Cambio, that we're really hoping to invest in more time and energy and love, knowing that Latinos are a growingly split demographic. And yeah, just like it's not a reason to pull back because you think you've lost this environment already. It's a reason to like this is the new era, new frontier of media, and we have to realize that we're coming up short.
Yeah, I wanna hand it off to Abby, but really quick, it just made me think about I sent an article in our NMV Slack chat that was showing all the creators on the left versus the right and their reach and influence, and it was shocking to see how much investment and how big the audience reach was on the right versus the left. So to your point, that's a lot of what you're highlighting here is just continuing to invest in the infrastructure so that we have it when we need it versus needing it and needing to fund it really quickly and doing it in a way where it doesn't actually activate all of these things you're talking about, the authenticity, the trust, the genuineness that actually drives people in their decision making. So I just wanted to add that. But yeah, Abby, I think you were going to come in.
Oh yeah, no, you're good. You're inspiring this next question I have for sure because I also love how you kind of touched on funding and would love to dig into that a little bit more because we do have yeah, like another 4 years before, or well, 2 years before our midterms, and then another 2 years before the presidential election. Would love to hear where you feel like practically like funders need to spend their money.
In order to actually build trust with the masses, you have to be a little uncomfortable as a funder. I'd imagine,
Mm.
knowing the average funder, like Gen Z for Change has a pulse on young people, and having a pulse on young people means that we are going to call for a ceasefire. It means that we are going to call for communities that aren't built around policing, but rather fully funding public schools. These are the issues that more than just young people, but I know that every generation's more progressive than the other, are calling for. And in order to be authentic, we have to be authentic ourselves. And funding organizations, you can't shy away from the authenticity piece. Like, you can't manufacture
Mm.
an organization in a way that agrees with you entirely, because then you're just going to lose the trust on the audience that you're trying to reach. And so and and I would just yeah, emphasize that, because it seems like the Democratic Party is trying to be everything and nothing at the same time. And when, the moment calls for things, the tent is big enough for everyone except for, the Palestinian speaker at the DNC. And you can bring as many creators as you want, but note that the creators that they brought to the DNC care so much about Palestine that they started covering the uncommitted movements, uh, sit in outside the DNC, calling for a speaker, because they knew their audience was going to want them to cover that. And so, you can't control creators, you can't control youth-led organizations. You just have to fund them, knowing that these are the people that truly do have a pulse on the audience you are trying to influence. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, just putting more trust, I think, is really important.
I love that, and I love that you're like, the creators cannot be controlled, and that is such a good call-in for funders to really reflect on their relationship to their grantees and the people that they're providing access to funds to be able to develop those authentic relationships even in that funder-grantee relationship.
Closing, I'd love to ask a question. Looking into the future, everything we've been talking about, I feel like the media infrastructure, like in order to build a really strong media infrastructure, we can only go so far with the candidates that we've been given and everything like that. And I think it's easy to feel so hopeless. And so I'm like, I guess I'm curious, at least, I guess I'm curious, like, what is inspiring you? What is radicalizing you? What's keeping you grounded right now?
I've been thinking a lot about why power concedes to movements. And I believe the reason that Kamala Harris, and not just her, but like the party, has failed to talk about minimum wage or rent caps or universal health care or any of the issues that are, popular and, kitchen table issues during the campaign is because we are not powerful enough to concede to.
Mm.
And to answer of why I'm hopeful is because change has never come from who's president. It has come from the power of movements externally that force powerful people to be different. The reason why I, as a Californian, get a free sickle cell anemia test is because the Black Panthers offered them for free in the 60s and 70s. And, the FBI destroyed them, but what lasted was their power, because now Tim Walz, not a Panther, signs in Minnesota a free school meals for K through 12 students. That would never have happened without the power of community-based organizations demanding meeting the needs that the state won't meet. And I I fully believe that it is possible to bring that power back and evolve it in the time of the year of 2024, 2025, and and be optimistic, because we are creating the change that we want to see. And with community power, tenant power, labor power, we can do it. And Amazon workers, they're winning and building power despite Amazon acting as if labor law doesn't even exist. Amazon's been operating like it's a Trump administration this entire time, and it has never squandered the movement for economic justice amongst Amazon workers. And it is only escalating. And so I take inspiration from workers who are fighting under the worst conditions right now, and far other, grassroots organizers that are really doing the work in the South and in right to work states, living near fossil fuel plants that are resulting in them going to a funeral a week, and they're still going and they're still winning and they're still in this work. And I think as young people, we should turn to our movement elders and, like, ask them questions about what they did in the past. And because we had power, and there's a reason why the state was involved in trying to squander it, because it was powerful, and we have wins today thanks to that. So I have hope looking at through history. I have hope, recent history, past history, and I have hope now in the workers and community members that are doing and fighting every single day.
Amazing. What better place to land? Thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for listening.